I'm a huge family man, just wonderful, wonderful person.
Editors and got my payments almost.
More embarrassment lately, like because of the situation. I don't know if it's like ashamed that my husband died in this way. I go to a cocktail party and I feel like everyone knows that he died that way, and it's, I don't know, it's just some.
On September 11th, terrorists tried to change America forever. Well, they succeeded.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome.
This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
I'm standing here at the World Financial Center. A year ago, this was the site of an American icon, the World Trade Center. Topping the skyline of New York, its majestic twin towers soared a quarter-mile over the lower tip of Manhattan. But now all that remains is a gaping space, a place of truly awful memories. Hello, I'm Arthur Kent. Welcome to the History Channel's look back at the 9/11 year, a year shaped by the attacks last September. This was the epicenter, the scene of the most devastating blow the terrorists were able to deliver. The World Trade Center was in many ways a pinnacle of American ambition, ingenuity, and faith in technology. When the towers were completed in 1973, they were the tallest in the world. They inspired awe and wonder in millions. But they would one day inspire resentment, hatred, and a vow of destruction from those bent on a holy war against America. Join us now as the History Channel presents the World Trade Center, Rise and Fall of an American Icon.
New York's World Trade Center took nearly 12 years to build. Its designers virtually reinvented the skyscraper, bringing brilliant solutions to difficult engineering problems. Then came September 11th. A new set of catastrophic technical problems must be confronted.
At the World Trade Center sites, it seems like everything was pulverized.
We moved very quickly to bring in all the federal agencies.
Rescue workers must search for victims among blazing rubble.
There's just no way to describe it unless you see it. There's nothing to compare it to.
1 million tons of dangerous debris must be removed before more lives are endangered.
We're dealing with a moving target.
A 16-acre disaster site carefully mapped.
The North Tower is right here.
Missing persons identified using only a fragment of bone.
When you can say to a family, here are your remains, it does bring very good closure to them.
And an engineering autopsy must seek the truth about how and why the buildings fell.
We have looked at well over 1,000 photographs, video footage. We studied well in excess of 200 hours in detail.
The mammoth rescue and recovery effort and far-reaching forensic and engineering analyses are without precedent in American history. Engineers, architects, and scientists would have to fashion sense out of madness. September 11th, 2001. A day of grief. A day of courage. a day no one will ever forget. This is how that day unfolded.
Everybody said, "You're nuts. Planes don't fly over Midtown." Within a few seconds, you heard like a boom, and the building shook. My daughter called me. She said, plane just flew into the World Trade Center. I said, "Nah, you gotta be kidding." It's gotta be a Piper Cub or some clown was flying down the river.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston, with 92 aboard, traveling at a speed of 470 miles per hour, strikes the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex.
All of a sudden, coming past our window was a blizzard of paper and small snowflake-like particles. And the first thing that crossed my mind was a ticker tape parade, but it just didn't make any sense. And so we looked in the direction where the source of the paper, and we saw that the Tower 1 was on fire.
The aircraft was banked quite steeply at the time it actually hit the building. So instead of going in and affecting maybe 2 floors, it affected 4 or more floors.
The impact leaves a jagged hole in the structure's north face from the 98th down to the 94th floors. Following the impact, the physical weight of the building is redistributed. The undamaged portions take on the work of the missing parts.
The north side of the building started working somewhat like an arch, so that the loads that were coming straight down now had to come down, go around that hole, and be picked up by the columns that were still in place.
But structural damage is not all the building must withstand. Of the 10,000 gallons of jet fuel aboard the aircraft, as many as 3,000 gallons ignite and are consumed within 2 seconds. 4,000 gallons disperse as a fiery vapor cloud.
Those floors are immediately set on fire. All of the carpets, the furniture, any combustible inside the building.
Within minutes, officials coordinate the citywide emergency response. Their base of operations is a state-of-the-art command center located on the 23rd floor of 7 World Trade Center.
It's operating fine. The Deputy Director for Planning, Rich Rotans, has the platform. The agencies are starting to come in as automatically would happen, and we're reaching out to those agencies that are unaware.
With 1 tower in flames, the tragedy is only beginning. It is 9:03 when United Airlines Flight 175, with 65 aboard, traveling at the speed of 590 miles per hour, smashes into the south tower of the World Trade Center. Instead of a dead-on impact, as occurred with the North Tower, this aircraft strikes the corner of the South Tower. It rips a diagonally shaped gash from the 84th to the 78th floors.
It was banked at a somewhat steeper angle so that more floors were hit. It was going almost 100 miles an hour faster than the one that hit the North Tower. And that makes it worse.
The zone of impact on the South Tower is 20 stories lower than that of the North Tower. Therefore, the damaged structure is supporting a heavier load.
All of these things combined added up to that building having more severe damage than the North building, and therefore we think that's one of the reasons that it came down first.
The fires inside the towers weaken steel supports called trusses that hold up each floor. Thus compromised, the trusses give way. The South Tower lasts only 56 minutes before it succumbs at 9:59 a.m. It strikes the ground at a speed of 124 miles per hour.
The floors below could not possibly withstand the weight of scores of stories coming down on that with the, sort of the impact and thrust load of that.
The dust cloud billows outward for blocks. Victims stagger away.
I've never seen nothing like it in my life.
Some clutching scraps of clothing over their nose and mouth so they can breathe. Alan Reese, the man responsible for the day-to-day operation of the World Trade Center complex, is one of the lucky ones who escapes harm. He finds cover under an overhang at 5 World Trade.
You couldn't breathe, you couldn't see, and then slowly you began to see a little light. Then you realized you were still alive. But we were covered with ash. It looked like the nuclear winter.
After the South Tower falls, city officials manage the disaster response from their command center, but they won't be there for long.
Somewhere in that time, and it's very hard to keep track of time during this, they had been ordered to evacuate number 7 by the Port Authority. To this day, we don't know who gave that order, but whoever it was saved a lot of people's lives.
At 10:28, the television mast atop the North Tower spears straight down.
Once the collapse started, there really wasn't any way to stop it. It was just going to go all the way down once it got started.
Chaos in New York City. Power is down in Lower Manhattan. Phone lines jammed with more than 230 million calls. Hundreds of firefighters trapped in the towers. Hundreds more race to the scene.
When the world is coming down around you, you have to keep your head. It sounds trite, but it's the absolutely essential element to anything to do with emergency service communications.
Falling debris from the collapse of the North and South Towers ignites fires in the neighboring buildings of the World Trade Center. World Trade 4, 5, and 6 are ablaze. World Trade 7, the building housing the city's command center, burns unchecked for 7 hours. At 5:20, it collapses. The city's emergency nerve center is destroyed. Temporary quarters, in the form of a mobile communications trailer, are pressed into service.
The mayor needs to have accurate information so he can run government. So the first thing that was already started was our command vehicle, which is an over-the-road coach converted to a command center. It seats about 20 people and has full communications backup.
With New York a war zone, some residents walk across the Brooklyn Bridge to get out of the city. Others seek escape in vessels piloted by the Army Corps of Engineers.
Using 8 boats, the Corps of Engineers removed and evacuated approximately 3,000 individuals, including many that were injured, to locations in New Jersey and in Brooklyn.
Some of the tugboats had actually pulled bed sheets out and spray painted on there where they were going, Brooklyn, Hoboken, whatever.
At 7:45 p.m., the New York Police Department says 78 officers are missing and estimates that 200 firefighters are dead.
It's terrible. I mean, the damage is terrible. People are doing everything that they can to rescue as many people as possible, and this is going to be a long-term effort. So I just wanted to make sure that everything is here that could be here, and it is. So we just pray to God that we can save a few people.
By 10 p.m., Mayor Rudolph Giuliani seeks to calm fears that the attacking planes carried airborne chemical or biological agents.
The health department has done tests and at this point is not concerned. But so far, all the tests that we've done do not show an undue amount of asbestos. It doesn't show any particular chemical agent that we have to be concerned about.
The City Department of Environmental Protection started monitoring almost immediately. We have a very large monitoring program going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The air sampling program focuses on 3 zones. A passive collector unit mounted on a pole takes in air upwind and crosswind of ground zero. Spectrographic analysis reveals normal background levels of airborne chemicals. Downwind, investigators find airborne irritants in excess of normal levels, but attribute them to the fires burning at the site. At 10:56 p.m., police officials say they believe there are victims alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center.
Working with urban search and rescue teams, there was a lot of areas to be searched underneath the debris field. There were voids that had to be searched for possible live people.
September 11th, 2001, the longest and most tragic day in New York's history, is drawing to a close.
I lost 14 Port Authority employees that worked directly for me and then 2 supplemental employees. So 16 in total, plus mechanical staff, 11 security guard staff, and it goes on, you know. I've been to almost 40 funerals or wakes or memorial services so far.
The 16-acre site would become the proving ground where rescue workers and investigators faced the most difficult challenges of their lives.
Just behind Ground Zero, you can see one of the city's first great skyscrapers, the Woolworth Building, opened in 1913, and it was known then as the Cathedral of Commerce. The skyscraper was a New York invention, a place of business that seemed to reach to the heavens. The World Trade Center towers were conceived as the ultimate skyscrapers. They would symbolize the global dominance of American capitalism. Tragically, they would also become a target to its enemies. We now return to the World Trade Center, rise and fall of an American icon.
For many, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center expressed what was big and bold about New York. 50,000 people worked in 10 million square feet of space. Each floor was a full acre in size. Each 110-story tower had 99 elevators. The entire complex was dense with the hum of humanity. On September 11th, 25,000 people were able to escape. In part, that was thanks to the tower's designers and caretakers, who had gone to great lengths to make them a safe place in which to work.
We had a routine where certain structural integrity elements were inspected either two-year cycle, 4-year cycle, or 8-year cycle. Much more than anything that a building code would require. We kept up and maintained our buildings.
These buildings were built as well or better than you would expect any building to be built under those codes.
There were 3 emergency stairways in each tower. There were 828 emergency exits, 300 security guards, and 6 emergency generators that provided 7,200 kilowatts of electricity, enough to power 4,000 suburban homes. There was a backup diesel power plant on site and a command center to monitor all building systems using 300 security cameras. The designers even foresaw that an airplane might crash into one of the towers. Frank DeMartini was a project manager at the World Trade Center who perished on September 11th while trying to help others escape the North Tower.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded
707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time.
But no one anticipated an act of terrorism as bold as it was horrible.
The idea was that the plane might be lost in the fog, leaving or arriving to JFK or LaGuardia airports. Not a terrorist attack, not an aggressive attack. The speeds, therefore, were thought to be lower.
When the towers were being built, a terrorist attack on American soil was simply inconceivable. It was an optimistic time, ripe with energy and promise, when America wanted to build the biggest and the best. The Twin Towers were completed in 1974. They became the tallest buildings in the world. But neither the World Trade Towers nor any other tall buildings would have been possible without two critical engineering developments.
First, the elevator. You can't have a tall office building without the elevator. And the first commercial building that was built with an elevator was the Equitable Life Assurance Company's headquarters on Broadway. It was built in the late 1860s. The next major advance was the development of the steel skeleton frame, which occurs in 1888 when the Tower Building is built, which was probably the world's first building with a steel skeleton frame.
With the steel skeleton and the elevator, the Manhattan skyline began an extraordinary transformation.
Within only a few years after the Tower Building was completed in the late 1880s, you have enormous skyscrapers being built that were rising 20, 30 stories. These would not have been possible if the economics hadn't changed, if banking and commerce and trade and the insurance businesses weren't growing.
During the first decades of the 20th century, some of New York's most famous skyscrapers were built. In 1903, the Flatiron Fuller Building. In 1909, the Metropolitan Life Tower reached 700 feet. And in 1913, the Woolworth Building soared 792 feet. The next great development in skyscrapers occurred in the 1920s.
It culminated in 1930 and 31 with buildings like the Chrysler Building and, of course, the Empire State Building, which was the world's tallest building for the 40 years before the World Trade Center. During each one of those cycles, there was a boom in the economy that drove the heights of buildings ever taller.
It was in 1946 that New York lawmakers first conceived the idea of an international or World Trade Center.
The idea came about that there would be a big trade mart based on the ancient fair in Leipzig, which went back to the Middle Ages. There would be a fair, a permanent trade exposition in New York where people from all over the world could come and show their goods.
But when market research revealed that the city would benefit more by modernizing its ports, the idea was scrapped. It wouldn't resurface again for more than a decade, and only then under the aegis of urban renewal and the influence of one of New York's most famous heirs, David Rockefeller, grandson of Standard Oil founder and billionaire John D. Rockefeller. In 1958, Rockefeller spearheaded what was called the $1 billion plan to stimulate business and revitalize Lower Manhattan.
His vision was to spend $1 billion of private and public monies to create a kind of gleaming futuropolis. And the core of this thing is going to be this great public purpose, a World Trade Center that will secure the future of New York City's port forever. So they said, well, here's all this stuff we can demolish over on the east side. This, by the way, is where the South Street Seaport is today. All the preserved buildings are today. But at that point, it was considered fair game. They're 19th century buildings, knock them down.
It should also be pointed out that David Rockefeller's brother was Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York. So this is very helpful in pushing the project through.
To fund and build the new project, David Rockefeller and his supporters turned to the Port Authority. This agency was chartered in 1921 by the states of New York and New Jersey to build and operate all terminals or transportation facilities such as bridges, tunnels, and train lines within a 25-mile radius of the Statue of Liberty.
The Port Authority is a hybrid creature partly a government agency and partly operating as a private business. No one else had quite the same combination of deep pockets and financial resources, the right of eminent domain, and the technical engineering skills to launch a big project.
The other great power that the Port Authority has stems from the nature of public authorities in general. If you want to build a project that costs $1 billion, you simply sell bonds to do that, and then you charge rents or tolls or something like that to pay those bonds off.
The self-supporting agency built, owned, and operated several megastructures, such as the Lincoln Tunnel and the George Washington Bridge. By the early 1960s, the World Trade Center project was added to its portfolio under the auspices of Port Authority Director Austin J. Tobin.
There was a kind of professionalism that the Port Authority was known for in its engineering and its planning and its whole way of carrying things out, which was really impeccable. Really impeccable. And Tobin was the guy who did that, and he was the central point of control. He was the Sun King.
The original plan was to put it on the east side of Lower Manhattan. Bear in mind that the Port Authority is a bi-state agency. So understandably, the governor of New Jersey was concerned. He said, well, you're building this World Trade Center for New York. What are you going to do for us?
The Port Authority agreed to take over New Jersey's bankrupt Hudson and Manhattan Commuter Railroad, today known as PATH, the Port Authority Trans-Hudson Line. This railroad had been running since 1908 and was in dire need of a facelift. Its terminus was on the west side of Lower Manhattan.
Once this deal was in place, that New Jersey was getting the PATH, New York was getting the Trade Center, gradually it hit everyone. Why not put it on the west side, and then you can do two projects at once? It was a brilliant breakthrough, and the governor of New Jersey said, at least we can see the damn thing.
By 1962, the World Trade Center project was moved from the east side to the middle of a west side neighborhood known as Radio Row.
It was a bazaar of retailers, mostly involving consumer electronics of some kind. And this was where the first TVs were sold off the shelves in the United States. I mean, this was the consumer appliance mecca.
Radio Row merchants protested, but their shops would vanish by way of the wrecking ball as plans to build the biggest complex in Lower Manhattan geared up.
Ultimately, they didn't have much of an argument when you compared what, in the minds of the various judges who heard the cases, was the public good. Well, I mean, you're just a business. You can go and you can move someplace else. But this is Lower Manhattan. And the financial district has to expand. I mean, look, you guys got to get out of the way.
The merchants were bought out. Planners decided the World Trade Center site would occupy 16 acres, but it was not yet known who would design it.
When Yama received the letter, we looked at the letter, and Yama kind of called us together and said, you know, it just shows how careful you got to be when you write a letter of invitation like this, because here's a project that obviously has a misplaced decimal point. It's got too many zeros. Who would be asking our firm to do a project of $250 million? But we prevailed upon Yama to follow through and make a call.
It was the call that changed his life. Out of a field of more than a dozen prominent architects, Austin Tobin and the Port Authority chose Minoru Yamasaki and his firm out of Michigan to design not only the Twin Towers, but an entire complex of buildings that would surround them. The project would become a symbol not only of New York, but also of America.
The objects that stick in my mind down there, one is the buckets and the bucket brigade. The buckets that civilians, firefighters, everybody used to get that rubble out. For such a large operation, it was handled with such a small item as a bucket. And I don't know, I just thought the irony of it was kind of strange. A bucket.
All of a sudden, you just heard the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life, and got about 10 steps when I got blown across the lobby, and that's when I lost my tools, my Halligan and my axe. And then just the other day, the Halligan was returned, was found at the landfill, and was returned here on Tuesday.
This is one of the axes that our guys carried in on the 11th. That was found the next day. This case here, two firemen from Half Moon Bay company in San Francisco came, and they helped us out with a few things here, and they actually made this case and got all the pictures of all members here, and had the axe in here for us. You know, something that one of our guys had with him at that time, you know, and it kind of gave hope, but instead it's still here. The axe is still here, and memories of them will always be here.
On September 20th, for country, for love.
All that matters to me now.
They can't find Jack.
For friendship.
You're responsible to yourself and to God. I am responsible to my friend. I will find him!
Heath Ledger, Wes Bentley, Kate Hudson.
Just come back to me safely.
The Four Feathers, rated PG-13. Starts September 20th.
Blood isn't just needed in a disaster. Fact is, every 2 seconds, somebody in America needs blood. Please consider becoming a regular donor with the American Red Cross. You can help save more Camille's, Mallory's, Lizzie's, and Becky's. Call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE for an appointment. Who knows how many will be saved by you.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome.
This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
Twisted steel, an ID card, a fire truck almost intact. We at the History Channel were honored to have exclusive access to the effort to rescue and preserve objects of significance during the 9/11 recovery. A briefcase, a fragment of a plane, a way of remembering the day that changed us forever. Relics from the rubble, next on the History Channel.
Every day, AmeriDebt helps more people with money problems.
My credit card debt was outrageous. Then I called AmeriDebt. They contacted my creditors and got my payments almost cut in half.
AmeriDebt is a nonprofit organization that offers free consultations to consumers seeking to eliminate their debt.
Every month I pay our credit card bills, but the balances never seem to get smaller.
AmeriDebt got our interest rates reduced, and now the balances are dropping dramatically.
Join the thousands of people who have turned their financial lives around. Call 1-800-354-3400.
We now return to the World Trade Center, rise and fall of an American icon, here on the History Channel.
It was 1962 when Japanese-American architect Minoru Yamasaki won the contract to build the World Trade Center complex.
Yamasaki was a rather strange choice as an architect because he had never built anything on this scale before, and most of his previous buildings had been rather precious boxes, buildings that were detailed and ornamented in a way that you wouldn't expect to relate to the size of the World Trade Center. He was also famously a strange pick because he had fear of heights.
What impressed the Port Authority was Yamasaki's grasp of engineering and his character. He was a self-made man, rising from a hard-scrabbled childhood in Seattle to fame as an award-winning architect.
They saw someone who was similar in some ways to them and to their values. This was not an architectural prima donna.
Yamasaki wanted to build 2 towers that would soar 80 stories. He wanted visitors to think of the generous open space of Piazza San Marco in Venice when they came to work in the World Trade Center. Although they were giants, the World Trade Towers were to have a human touch. Windows were designed shoulder width to give people a sense of security, no matter how high the floor. But the Port Authority wanted to make one small change in the plan, a change that would make the towers a magnet for worldwide attention, the very fame that would later help turn them into twin targets.
Given the square footage demands of the World Trade Center project, the Public Relations Department began to say, well, why not make it the tallest building in the world?
This presented an engineering and economic challenge for the architect Yamasaki.
Mr. Yamasaki was very, very nervous about that because of the cost of pushing those extra floors in. He was fearful that the economics of the project would dictate to stripping away some of the planting in the plaza, the flowers in the plaza, the sculpture in the plaza, and even in the lobbies, the stainless steel doors, all of these things that he was so fond of.
At the start, the budget was an unheard of $335 million. In 1966, it ballooned to $575 million. The 1,250-foot Empire State Building, the tallest building in the world since 1931, was about to be eclipsed by the new 1,360-foot towers of the World Trade Center.
The World Trade Center was conceived when American ambition and a faith in technology was really at its peak. If you think of the other sort of supersized topics of the day like jumbo jets, you have some sense of the sort of ambitious love of bigness that the World Trade Center represents.
To make the towers the tallest in the world, Yamasaki not only had to rethink the structure, but also had to consider the ground upon which they were to be built.
A major problem in the construction of the World Trade Center was the fact that it was going to be built in Lower Manhattan in an area which was fundamentally fill. You have to think about the geology of the area. Lower Manhattan represents the confluence of 2 large rivers and the ocean.
Since the 1600s, ambitious landfill operations extended the waterfront of Manhattan by more than 700 feet. Dirt, rocks, and even old piers and wharves were used to build up the existing land. To reach bedrock, engineers would have to dig down 70 feet and at the same time not disturb the foundations of the surrounding buildings.
If you start to dig a hole, what happens is that if you only go down 3 feet, your hole fills up with water. They needed to dig not just a 3-foot hole, but a very, very large hole.
The first obstacle, then, was how to control and remove the water while laying a foundation for the enormous structures.
They had to come up with wonderful engineering techniques to actually pour that foundation while all this water was pressing in on the foundation structure itself.
The project engineers decided to utilize the slurry trench method. It had been used for subway construction in Europe and in Canada, and now would be used for the first time in the United States. For this project, excavating machines would dig a 3-foot wide trench down to bedrock. As dirt and rock were removed, they would be replaced by slurry. Slurry is a mixture of water and bentonite, a type of clay that swells and would plug any hole along the side of the trench as excavators dug deeper. Workers lowered a pre-assembled 7-story high steel cage of reinforcing rods weighing 22 tons into the slurry trench. Then concrete was placed at the bottom of the excavation using a long pipe called a tremie pipe. As the concrete flowed in, it displaced the bentonite. Construction workers made 152 of those 22-foot trench segments to enclose an area 2 blocks wide and 4 blocks long.
It was like building a bathtub, only it's a bathtub in reverse. The purpose of this bathtub, 800 feet long, 200 feet wide, 70 feet deep, was not to contain water, but to keep water out.
And the bathtub, you could have swum, Moby Dick could have done laps in the bathtub because it was that big.
After the towers were attacked, portions of the slurry wall collapsed under falling debris, and the mighty waters of the Hudson would try to reclaim their domain. But during construction, the slurry wall fabrication was just one of the challenges to be faced. Landfill had to be removed from an excavation 7 stories deep. It would tally up to 1 million cubic yards to be transported in 100,000 truckloads.
Instead of carting this dirt all the way to New Jersey or hauling it way out to sea, simply place it on the west side of West Street. They measured out an area just west of West Street, which would extend 700 feet out into the Hudson River, be 1,400 feet long, in other words, about the size of 6 city blocks.
The new landfill created some of the most valuable real estate in the country, some $90 million worth of land that eventually became Battery Park and the World Financial Center. Now that the foundation was in place, thousands of tons of steel had to be hoisted up over 100 floors. In past construction of skyscrapers, derricks were used. But a derrick had to be constantly lifted to a higher position, 1 floor at a time, costing several man-hours. Derricks also had to be powered from the ground, with extremely long cables running down through the floor already built. The answer was a self-powered crane that came from across the globe.
These were the so-called kangaroo cranes, nicknamed because they're coming from Australia, and they were put at the corner of each building. And what these kangaroo cranes essentially were able to do was to hoist themselves up with automatic machinery built into the crane such that the crane could rise as the building went up.
The crane's diesel motor supplied the power, driving a series of hydraulic lifts installed at the base of each corner.
Then an interesting problem at the very end is how do you get the kangaroo crane down? And the way that was done is they had to be disassembled and brought down by elevator.
Construction of the Twin Towers began in August 1968. Architect Minoru Yamasaki would move away from conventional techniques to create a completely different type of skyscraper.
The common sense way of understanding the construction of a skyscraper, we think back to our childhood, is building it like an erector set. You have little pieces of steel which you hold together with rivets and grommets, and it's like building a cage. This is the normal way of building a steel skyscraper. It's a cage-like construction. You have vertical members and horizontal members, and you build little boxes, and you pile box upon box upon box, and thus you have a skyscraper. Yamasaki wanted something different.
It was a pioneering design decision that proved to be a critical choice affecting the lives of thousands on September 11th.
What Yamasaki came up with, in conjunction with structural engineers, is to make the skin of the building much stronger so that you wouldn't need internal columns.
The towers were examples of what engineers would call tube structures. Visualized from above, they were approximately square, 209 feet on each side, with 59 columns on each face forming the tube. The core, containing elevators, stairwells, and mechanical equipment, consisted of a rectangular arrangement of 47 columns. It was a revolutionary way to construct a high-rise building. The tube design was an innovative concept, but in practice, the elevators required would have taken up too much space. Seeking a solution, designers divided each tower into 3 parts, or zones, each with its own sky lobby. People would be able to get to work by taking an express and then a local elevator.
People readily accepted it because the truth was that this system, even though it involved 2 rides, the express ride and the local ride, actually saved time and resulted in a shorter wait.
The last piece of steel was put in place on the North Tower on December 23, 1970, and on the South Tower in July of 1971. Finally, on April 4, 1973, the plaza sculptures were in place and the complex was ready for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. One of the dignitaries attending was the governor of New York, Nelson A. Rockefeller, who said, "It's not often that we see a dream come true. Today, we have." For the next 20 years, about 50,000 people reported to work each day at the World Trade Center, while an additional 200,000 visitors passed through. It became the hub of the New York financial district, and for many, the heart of the city. Then, on February 26, 1993, the World Trade Center received the first major test of its structural integrity. A bomb with a destructive power equal to 2,200 pounds of TNT exploded in the parking garage of the second-floor basement of the North Tower. 6 people died and more than 1,000 were injured when the bomb exploded at 12:18 p.m.
All I remember is a tremendous loud sound and a blast of wind going behind me, and the secretary that was walking with me that day, and she was heading down the hall to the carpenter's office, both of her legs were broken.
The explosion ripped through the basement floor, creating a hole 100 feet wide and 4 stories deep. But the damage was minimal, given the size of the bomb. That's because the trade towers were built to withstand hurricane-force winds of 150 miles per hour, more stress than was exerted by the blast. After the 1993 attack, what concerned engineers most was the slurry wall that kept out the waters of New York Harbor. The horizontal basement floors that helped support the wall were damaged, but within 36 hours, additional bracing solved that problem. 20 days after the blast, the World Trade Center reopened its doors. Extra security measures were put in place. Tenants and visitors to the building would wear electronic identification badges. Parking lot access was also restricted. A worldwide 2-year-long manhunt produced a suspect in the bombing, and later in 1998, Ramzi Youssef was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for his role in planning the attack. Investigators believe that he is an Al-Qaeda operative. No one dreamed that some 8.5 years later, the same terrorist organization would bring death not from a bomb in the basement, but from the sky.
In 1993, terrorists tried to topple the World Trade Center and failed. But the buildings remained at the top of their target list, and what they could not destroy from below, they would attack by air. Years of planning culminated on September 11th as 2 hijacked jets slammed into the towers and exploded. In less than 2 hours, the buildings were reduced to rubble and dust. Within a day, thousands of people began a desperate search for survivors. We return now to the World Trade Center, rise and fall of an American icon.
September 11th, the most deadly terrorist attack ever on American soil. A day later, on September 12th, missing persons still numbered in the thousands. Thousands of rescue workers swarmed the scene. and officials were asking for even more help.
People want to help out, whether they're medical professionals or construction workers or just simply people who want to volunteer. We'll be able to sign them up and be able to call on them as this process goes forward, not just for days, but for weeks and weeks.
FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, was in charge, but the large volunteer response at the site nearly overwhelmed the agency's capabilities for organization. The agency dispatched 1,300 workers to Ground Zero. There were nearly 2,000 more from other agencies, including the Red Cross, the FBI, the New York City Police and Fire Departments.
The local contractors really reacted quickly, so there was a lot of equipment here. I mean, everybody tried to help.
There were 16 acres of debris to pick through. Rescue workers had to avoid dangerous hotspots where jet fuel fires burned. Move a mountain of debris. At first, bucket by bucket, because authorities feared that heavy machinery might endanger survivors buried in rubble. With all air travel grounded as a safety precaution, disaster response teams had to find other ways to get to New York.
We had people who drove from Florida, drove from Kansas City, drove from Chicago. You know, these are key people, dedicated people who basically jumped in their cars and drove.
Later, when airports reopened, and as FEMA continued to focus the rescue effort, urban search and rescue teams came from as far away as California.
These are specially trained, equipped, ready to go fire department teams who are experts in urban search and rescue.
Take that line slow.
And those teams coordinated with the city to go down to the site and help the city as the city needed it.
The coordination activity there has been phenomenal. If you can only imagine every city agency that you've ever conceptualized of, every federal regulatory agency, every federal assistance agency, and trying to get all of these people on the same page has been a considerable task.
In the first 24 hours after the attacks, more than 260 pieces of heavy equipment and 240 trucks converged on the site to sift through the debris, which towered to a height of 60 feet in some areas.
It's a very complex process because you have to understand that the World Trade Center towers were not these two towers that rose out of a cornfield and they collapse and you come and move it all away. It's really quite the contrary. The towers were located over an enormous basement. The whole property is 16 acres, and there were low-rise buildings as well, and each tower is just 1 acre out of the whole 16.
FEMA also called on the Army Corps of Engineers, an organization with extensive experience in disaster recovery operations. But the Army Corps had seen nothing like this in its history.
Well, we had some of our debris specialists had worked Hurricane Andrew, Oklahoma City. Of course, you have the recent events at the Pentagon. This is more than 10 times the debris that's at the Pentagon. None of our debris experts, who have a pretty fair amount of experience in debris operations, have ever seen anything like this. And we've used virtually all of the debris-trained specialists within the Corps of Engineers at the World Trade Center site over the past 2 months.
The work was particularly difficult because there was an enormous amount of debris in a relatively small location. Crews were also constantly on the lookout for survivors. Within 48 hours after the attacks, only 5 survivors would be pulled from the wreckage. By September 13th, the crews settled into a grinding 24/7 schedule that allowed them to remove 70,000 tons of debris a week. And daily, 75 trucks laden with debris rumbled through New York, one of the world's busiest cities.
It was pretty clear to everybody that with the amount of debris that was there, trucks were probably not going to be a long-term option. Then all those trucks trying to make it out of Manhattan across Staten Island, if things were ever going to return to normal in New York, you were going to have to get away from that situation.
The trucks were making a 20-mile trip through the city to cart their load, and health officials were concerned about particulates, including asbestos, blowing off them and into the lungs of New Yorkers. Personnel and vehicles leaving the site were scrubbed down to guard against pollution. The Army Corps of Engineers knew there had to be a more efficient and safer way to move the debris. Joe Seabode, New York liaison to the Army Corps, began looking into it.
From the beginning, I've been involved in coordinating with the city, state, and federal agencies, working with contractors to help facilitate some of the actual development of the operations that you're seeing here.
The Army Corps of Engineers began to investigate using a nearby transportation resource, New York Harbor. A single barge could carry the load assumed by 30 trucks. But a barge with that kind of capacity could not pass unless 155,000 cubic yards of material were dredged from the harbor bottom in 2 locations near piers used as loading points.
There was permitting issues, disposal of dredge material issues, survey work, analysis of the types of equipment that could efficiently operate in this type of an environment.
As Joe Seabode worked through the logistics before he could begin dredging, the Corps focused on another area of its expertise, creating maps that helped recovery workers navigate the disaster site. The Corps prepared a series of enhanced views of the site, providing rescue workers with maps that showed where the debris still burned.
It was an automated program similar to your computer-aided design software. It could then superimpose some of the infrared temperature readings that were being taken by remote sensing devices and other means and display it in different ways.
Even more sophisticated was a process called light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. By early afternoon on September 15th, this Piper Navajo Chieftain aircraft, equipped with lasers, gathered data from a vantage point 5,000 feet above the disaster site. Then the New York Office for Technology, the agency overseeing the operation, called in an expert to turn the raw data into useful maps.
We got a call saying, you're the only operational environment in town. Get your staff together and start making maps.
For more than 7 years, Dr. Sean Ahern has been mapping every square inch of New York City from the sky. Suddenly, his work was a matter of life and death, because rescue workers could use his maps to safely find their way around Ground Zero.
We mobilized instantly. We worked all night. The next morning, we literally took 3 of our computers with the New York City database on board, loaded them into a police cruiser, went down and set up what would be the seed for a very significant mapping operation, which would grow to some 30 computers. It's a really professional mapping operation.
To generate a LiDAR map, an aircraft equipped with lasers flies over the site. The laser fires at the ground surface. The data collected will allow scientists to calculate the distance from the plane to the particular topographic feature being measured. Millions of these points are plotted on a computer and joined to form a visual representation of the surface, accurate to within 6 inches in height.
It became a particularly important tool because at the wavelength that the laser fires, the smoke is transparent. So this was the first unimpeded view of the entire site. I still remember vividly, we printed one of these maps out. It was about 40 by 50 inches. I brought it into the command center. I had a group of firemen around me, and I rolled it out on the floor. Pretty soon, it didn't take long. They were able to interpret this image and relate it to their on-the-ground experience.
For the first time, the actual scope of the disaster was visible, and firefighters could better orient themselves.
The north tower is right here. You see, you just have that shell of the facade there. And here's the south tower is right here. And there's the center where the south tower stood. And the Marriott, all that's left of the Marriott is this little pile right in the back here.
And finally, Ahern's team was able to calculate the extent of the damage at the site. They estimated there would be more than 1 million tons of debris to be removed. They would later learn that their estimate would be far too low.
The World Trade Center, rise and fall of an American icon, will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
I pray for safety.
Geef mij de genade.
Gib mir die Kraft, mich mit dem Bösen auseinanderzusetzen.
I pray for a change in angry hearts.
No matter how you pray,
Die zornigen Herzen.
or where,
Pour la sécurité de tous.
the people of the United Methodist Church are praying with you.
In God's name we pray.
What a great room.
So comfortable.
How about that breakfast buffet? All you can eat. I can't believe a room only cost us $99 a night. $99?
For both of you?
How did you get such a great deal? Hotels.com.
Hotels.com.
Save on thousands of hotels worldwide. Hotels.com. The best prices at the best places, guaranteed.
Three friends divided by war.
Time to put his gun down! Don't!
They can't find Jack.
Now, one man will change his identity.
Your army abandoned them.
Go behind enemy lines.
You've done enough. It's never enough.
And risk his life to save his best friend. Keith Ledger, Wes Bentley, Kate Hudson.
I will find them!
The Four Feathers.
Just come back to me safely.
Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, September 20th.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome.
This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
You know, I played a lot of parts in this business, but I've never played one yet that wasn't at least a little demanding. And as you know, I've got diabetes. So it's important that I stay on top of it, and I try. I check my blood sugar, and I check it often. And I get my testing supplies from Liberty Medical. You know, Medicare covers diabetes testing supplies, and Liberty makes it easy to get. They bill Medicare and your insurance company for you and deliver right to your door. No charge for shipping, no paperwork, and nothing to pay up front. So take charge, won't you? Check your blood sugar as often as your doctor says. And call Liberty. They can help you live a better life.
Call Liberty toll-free at 1-800-251-9112 for more information on home delivery of diabetes testing supplies. You'll have no paperwork and no upfront costs. Call today, 1-800-251-9112.
We now return to the World Trade Center, rise and fall of an American icon, here on the History Channel.
For the first week following the disaster, rescue and recovery workers had combed through the wreckage of the World Trade Center, hoping to find living victims or discover their remains.
The recovery is not going to be done until the last person is found. It's still a recovery of missing people. It's going to be till the very end, until everybody's recovered.
Outside the boundaries of the 16-acre disaster site, the city struggled to get back online. The stock exchange reopened on Monday, September 17th, under new security measures. Verizon, the local phone company, sent 3,000 technicians into the field to repair or reroute 4 million voice and data circuits. Most of Lower Manhattan was without electricity after the collapsing towers severed electric feeder cables. 2 Consolidated Edison substations were also destroyed with the collapse of World Trade No. 7. 1,900 Con Edison workers laid more than 36 miles of temporary cable, and on September 19th, power was restored to Lower Manhattan. A team of structural engineers made their way into the smoking ruins of the World Trade Center and the buildings surrounding the site to assess the damage. Some structures, like 7 World Trade, were beyond repair. Others, like the Bankers Trust Building, were considered salvageable. On Saturday, September 15th, engineers began their first detailed inspection of the basement levels. Before the attack, the World Trade Towers rested on an underground city. 7 levels of shops, parking structures, utility basements, and subway stations that once served 150,000 people a day.
One of the things that we're experiencing that's making me a little bit more uncomfortable is that we're experiencing progressive collapses on a daily basis.
Heavy equipment on site sometimes caused unstable sections of the basement to collapse, rendering those sections impassable.
We're dealing with a moving target. Day by day, the conditions are changing under us as we're going down.
The collapse of the 110-story towers left a chaotic jumble of material that still burned from the jet fuel fires.
The fire is burning from the bottom because you have so many million square feet of office space that are in those towers. What kind of combustibles are in 1 million square feet of office space? The paper, the furniture, the carpets. The fires got very intense down there and it actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
No one knew where underground fires might trigger explosions and take more lives, or which subgrade levels were safe and which were death traps. Engineers making their inspections and rescue workers searching for victims desperately needed an accurate map of the basement levels. George Tamaro had one.
For example, let's look at this B1 level. This is 1 level below the street level at West Street and 2
Tamaro is lead engineer in the firm of Muser Rutledge Consulting Engineers. He was in charge of the team that supervised construction of the slurry wall. By Friday, September 14th, he had put together a book of photographs and drawings depicting the site before and after the attacks. He made color copies and handed them out to firefighters.
Everybody who saw a copy and was involved with the recovery or rescue operations was anxious to get a copy of it and use it to give them a mental picture of what was going on.
Acting under the direction of FEMA, Tamaro also sent his own engineers below every day to continually update their maps.
Structure intact, observed 9/30/01, AP, Andrew Pontecorvo. One of our engineers got into this area, inspected it, determined it was suitable.
Tamaro's engineers were joined by hundreds more who were volunteers, like Richard Garlock.
We were the ones that were carrying drawings with clipboards and flashlights and just trying to, look at a column or look at a location and say, okay, this is where I am in the drawing. And so that would put me, how far from the nearest stair.
The search teams left spray-painted codes to indicate that an area had been checked. An NYPD Emergency Services unit marked this area searched on September 17th. A task force sent from Florida inspected this subway station and left the initials FLTF to mark their presence. The spray-painted X signified a dangerous area. Keep out. The process would be repeated hundreds of times in the weeks to come. Where neither humans nor dogs could go, robots made the trip. Within 6 hours of the attacks, the first remotely controlled search and rescue robots were on the scene. They beamed back video of the devastation and deployed microphones ready to pick up a human cry for help. Later on, robots would find the remains of 5 victims of the attack. But by Monday, September 24th, Mayor Giuliani conceded that rescuers would need a miracle to find any more survivors beyond the 5 rescued in the first few days. With hope of a dramatic rescue all but gone, the work at Ground Zero became a recovery and debris removal operation. Joe Seabold of the Army Corps of Engineers had finally secured his dredging permits to create the channel that would allow large barges to carry off the wreckage of the World Trade Center.
That survey showed that the average water depth was about 4 to 5 feet in here. And having worked with Weeks Marine, the contractor to New York City, we established that they needed about 15 feet to properly operate a barge in this location.
First, divers like these took surveys of bottom conditions. They found debris, pier pilings, and cars, all of which could not be allowed to float free because they potentially could create a navigation hazard. Clamshell dredges on 144-foot-long barges were equipped to work day and night. An 1,890 horsepower winch powered a grappling device capable of lifting material weighing 80,000 pounds. The material dredged was taken to a disposal facility in New Jersey, where it was sealed off on its own site. The operation continued for 9 days until there was sufficient draw for the debris barges to pass unhindered.
That's worked really well, and we've been able to move now over 500,000 tons that they've moved. Most all of the largest portion of that has gone by barge.
Meanwhile, engineers completed their inspection of the subgrade levels beneath the tower footprints. They had bad news and evidence of a new threat. A mighty force of nature was advancing, and there wasn't much time to stop it.
As complete as the destruction was at Ground Zero last September, the final outcome could have been worse. The World Trade Center was built on landfill at the mouth of the Hudson River and protected from that river only by a wall of concrete around the foundation. But for intrepid engineering, this whole site might have been submerged. We return now to the World Trade Center, rise and fall of an American icon.
As workers searched for victims and removed debris at the largest disaster site in America, far underground, there were signs of more trouble.
When I arrived, I realized there were a good number of structural engineers on site who were doing building surveys. And what I did was realize that nobody was looking at the below-grade stuff.
The basement levels, 7 stories below grade, were unstable, a hidden danger that threatened everyone who worked at the site. The first sign of trouble was a large crack in the pavement that appeared on Liberty Street at the southern edge of the disaster site. To George Tamero, a structural engineer, this indicated that a critical below-ground wall was damaged.
We began to see cracks in the street, which indicated that the wall was moving and the ground behind the wall was moving towards us.
Tamero led the engineering team that oversaw the construction of the 3-foot-thick, 70-foot-deep reinforced concrete perimeter wall. This was the wall known as the Slurry Wall that had posed an engineering challenge almost 35 years earlier. At that time, slurry was poured into a trench to provide support. Then workers lowered a pre-assembled steel cage of reinforcing rods that provided strength to the concrete that was poured in last. The slurry wall, also called the bathtub, kept the Hudson River from flooding the World Trade Center. Tamero needed to know if it was damaged, but first, he had to find it.
Initially, we had absolutely no idea of what the condition of the wall was. All we were encountered was utter devastation. You didn't know where the wall was. It was buried under piles of portions of the building.
Because the slurry wall area was believed to be structurally unstable, robots made the first reconnaissance.
We're sending a small robot down the side of the slurry wall to inspect it. It's about 50 foot down, and then we're going to drive the robot as far as we can into the pile and see how far along the slurry wall it is still intact.
The robot video was viewed by fire department personnel and safety officers, who helped determine if it was safe to send in engineers to have a look. Later, George Tamaro made his own underground inspection, and it confirmed his fears. The slurry wall had fallen prey to the terrorists' attack. As the South Tower crashed to earth, it cut a 200-foot-long gash through the basement floor support system, leaving the slurry wall unsupported. Deformed by the powerful pressure from the Hudson River, the wall was moving, inch by terrible inch.
This drawing shows, for example, the outline of the slurry wall. It starts here at the south projection, runs along West Street, along Liberty Street, along Greenwich Street. This is this black line that I'm following, along Vesey Street.
Strengthening the slurry wall became a top priority, or else the site could flood.
There are a large number of engineers that are carefully looking at the integrity of that slurry wall, and all actions are being taken to ensure its integrity.
We didn't have many more options, and we began to immediately backfill the hole.
Tamaro's team put 40,000 cubic yards of material into an area running parallel to Liberty Street in order to stabilize the wall. Backfilling the wall in this way was only a temporary measure, and not only because the wall was under great pressure from the Hudson River, as evidenced by river water sluicing through a bundle of reinforcing cables known as a tieback, but also because of damage to the bathtub. The underground train line, path, that connected New York with New Jersey was flooding. There were 2 train tunnels, or tubes, north and south, and each needed a plug to stop the flow of river water.
The Port Authority wanted to plug the path tubes at Exchange Place so that they would prevent water from the World Trade Center coming into Exchange Place and traveling through the path system, potentially shutting the path system down. So we designed the plugs. We worked with the Port Authority to install the plugs.
Saturday, September 29th, a 16-foot thick, 16-foot diameter bulkhead made of concrete, designed by Tamaro's engineers, was placed in the south tube by heavy construction equipment. A second plug for the north tube would be in place by October 9th. Dewatering wells were fashioned from lengths of plastic pipe fitted with small electric pumps. These were able to drain the water by pumping at a rate of 3,000 gallons per minute. Despite these measures, George Tamaro was still concerned about the slurry wall's ability to hold back the Hudson.
We began to catch people's attention, and people have, week by week, gotten a better understanding of the delicacy or sensitivity of this wall and how important it is to retain its integrity.
You do have so much instability below grade in the basement areas. You have these areas that are partially collapsed, and the construction activities often collapse them further.
Tamaro wanted to install a new set of tiebacks, reinforcing cables, that would help the wall stay put. But this was no easy matter. The necessary drilling machines would not find safe purchase on the damaged basement slab, and if they broke through, rescue workers on the lower basement levels could be killed.
There are 2 tools that are proving to be practical at this site. One tool is a track-mounted machine that sits on a set of Caterpillar tracks, and it just drills through the face of the wall, down, and does all of the operation, independent of the face of the wall.
Where the basement slab was weakened or destroyed entirely, engineers worked with what are called floating leads.
It's a drill rig that's hung from a crane outside the walls, and it permits the driller to get to the face of wall without risking his equipment or his personnel.
The wall was stabilized. Temero's engineers felt their fixes would hold back the river and prevent the site from flooding. On the surface, firefighters and others continued to comb the debris for remains. Aside from huge pieces of twisted steel from the towers, there was little that was recognizable in the debris. Shrapnel-like fragments, gray dust. No one had ever seen anything like it, even at the site of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, also destroyed by an act of terrorism.
They said, you know, in Oklahoma City, you could see pieces of desks and chairs, and there was something that told you that this was an office building. At the World Trade Center site, it seems like everything was pulverized.
With no point of reference, recovery workers had no way of knowing if they were in the right place to find anything. The New York City Fire Department, in an effort to impose order, created a grid map for each sector of the disaster site, but it wasn't much use, given the magnitude of the destruction.
It's very difficult to figure out, obviously, which grid cell you're in. When you're in 16 acres of pure destruction, there's very little that you can reference it to.
The disorientation was keenly felt because recovery workers believed that charting each discovery might help them locate concentrations of remains, and engineers at the site believed that locating specific pieces of each building might help them understand how they collapsed. Dr. Sean Ahern thought he might have a solution.
We went upstairs and Chief Norman was on duty, and I explained to him that who we were, that we were trying to deploy a GPS application.
GPS, a global positioning system that would permit precise and instant geolocation. A GPS unit works by receiving signals from satellites in orbit around the Earth. The unit precisely measures the distance from its position up to the position of the satellites. By triangulating these reference points, the unit reads out the user's precise location. A company called Lynx Point helped Ahern put customized GPS units into the hands of firemen. These units combine the geolocation and identification functions in a single software package.
Lynx Point, who specializes in geolocation, put together a GPS application which enabled the firemen to go out, get a GPS location, get a timestamp, put a barcode on the bag containing the item, scan it, grab a drop-down menu which enumerated what the item was, boom, there they have it. Then they could take those points, bring them back to a mapping package, and map those points in space and time.
But even as recovery workers picked through the rubble for human remains, there were doubts they would be able to identify what they found. The victims' families were hoping that the tireless work of the ground crews would bring them closure. Authorities knew that putting names to the remains found would require advanced technology.
Aren't you afraid you won't come back?
When his best friend is sent off to war,
Time to put his gun down! Don't!
They can't find Jack.
one man will journey across a continent.
Why is it so important to follow the friends? To help them, if I can.
Fight for survival. And risk everything
You've done enough. It's never enough, Abu. I will find them!
to bring his friend back alive. The Four Feathers, rated PG-13, starts September 20th.
I pray for safety.
Gib mir die Kraft, mich mit dem Bösen auseinanderzusetzen.
I pray for a change in angry hearts.
No matter how you pray,
Die zornigen Herzen.
or where, the people of the United Methodist Church are praying with you.
In God's name we pray.
Introducing Suzuki 00 and 7 event, featuring America's #1 value plan. It's America's #1 finance offer and America's #1 warranty. 0% APR financing for 5 full years with 0 down payment on all new Suzuki models. And now, all new Suzukis come with a 100,000-mile 7-year powertrain limited warranty, like the XL7 with available third-row seating, and the 145 horsepower Aereo, now available with the confidence of all-wheel drive. The smart choice is America's #1 value plan, so move fast to your local Suzuki dealer today.
Have you saved a life today?
I took 2 flood victims to a shelter.
I donated a day's pay to help a family that lost everything in a fire.
Have you saved a life today?
I teach a class in infant CPR.
I donated a pint of blood.
Have you saved a life today?
No, but today somebody saved mine.
The American Red Cross. Together, we can save a life.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome. This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
Twisted steel, an ID card, a fire truck almost intact. We at the History Channel were honored to have exclusive access to the effort to rescue and preserve objects of significance during the 9/11 recovery. A briefcase, a fragment of a plane, a way of remembering the day that changed us forever. Relics from the rubble, next on the History Channel.
October 13th. More than a month following the attacks, the pit, as the site had come to be called, swarmed with activity. More than 1,000 construction workers had so far removed 290,000 tons of debris. The Army Corps of Engineers dredging project had smoothed the way for its removal.
We've reduced the distance that trucks need to travel by somewhere between 20 and 25 miles down to literally 1/2 mile.
The World Trade Center debris traveled by barge to a landfill on Staten Island called Fresh Kills. There it was placed on a conveyor belt and was sorted by hand. New York City police detectives with forensic training stood shoulder to shoulder to meet the grim and troubling task.
I can't promise anybody I'm going to find every piece that was in that building, but I can look you square in the eye and say I tried.
Forensic experts speculated that some victims may have been vaporized if they were on the floors where the airplanes penetrated. Still, the search for remains continued. Investigators were looking for evidence that might lead to the identification of a victim. A broken watch, a fragment of a credit card, a human body part, such as a hand, that could be fingerprinted. A few victims might be identified by traditional methods, such as jewelry, tattoos, and dental records. Most would require a DNA match. At the Bodie Technology Group in Virginia, thousands of vials, each representing an extinguished human life, began to arrive. One by one, they were logged into the computer tracking system. They were shipped to Virginia because the New York Medical Examiner's Office, the city agency responsible for victim identification, could not handle the volume of work generated by the World Trade Center attack.
The first week, we put a process in place, and we were able to process 1,000 bones in the first week. And that is something I believe that's never been done before by any forensic lab anywhere in the world.
At Bodie Technology, there were 13,000 vials to analyze. Each vial contained what investigators believed were the bone fragments of a single victim. Technicians would try to link those fragments to a name, a face, an identity. The first step was to drill into the bone fragments and get material from which DNA could be extracted. The DNA sample was processed through a series of chemical reagents that brought out what are called markers, a specific pattern of genetic code unique to each person.
In the United States, we have forensics standardized on 13 different markers. And they are sections of the DNA where we actually measure the length of DNA in the marker. The DNA print that is finally done does look very much like a barcode.
The DNA prints were sent to the medical examiner's office in New York, where they were compared with DNA samples taken from combs, toothbrushes, unwashed drinking cups, and other personal effects of the dead. If there was a match, the victim could be identified, the family notified.
When you can put the remains together and be able to say to a family, here are your remains, and they can actually bury those remains of their loved ones, it does bring very good closure to them. I think that's ultimately the reward that all of us have for putting in the extra effort to make this happen.
DNA technicians at Bodie Technology knew the job was more difficult than most. Conditions in the pit, humidity, chemicals, high heat from the fires that still smoldered, all these could diminish the chance that good DNA would be extracted from the bones.
The thing that's unique about the World Trade Center is as recently as the end of November, it was still 1,100 degrees down underneath the rubble, and so the remains there, unfortunately, are continuing to be subject to this heat and degradation.
By April 2002, DNA work at Bodie and other labs resulted in 218 positive victim identifications, with the official total of all victims at 2,824. The medical examiner's office had issued only 959 death certificates. An additional 1,735 death certificates were issued without a body at the request of the victims' families. This was done so that they could have some closure and receive death benefits. For months after the attacks, the pit remained active. Engineering experts made their way among steadily decreasing piles of rubble, deciding where heavy machines might be brought in safely.
Our role is to make sure that the structure below is intact. So we've been doing condition assessments, and that it is safe to carry the loads of cranes and the backhoes and grapplers that the contractors are using to remove debris.
We are still doing our coordinating role. We've removed about 750,000 tons of debris and steel. Still have another 650 or more thousand tons to go.
Other workers recovered evidence stored by law enforcement agencies, and even gold stored in bank vaults.
We're going to try and get around the rest of this.
Things that were taken out were cars, CIA cars and Secret Service cars, and U.S. Customs personnel cars, and drug seizure cars. There was the Bank of Nova Scotia's vault, which had gold, silver, platinum that was removed.
The precious metals, worth more than $230 million, were safe inside a vault in an area that narrowly escaped collapse. Following a recovery effort, every last gold, silver, and platinum bar was accounted for. As April turned to May, firefighters continued to rake the dust for any sign of a victim. Whenever one was found, all activity ceased out of respect.
People do not want to give up searching because it's fellow firemen, it's fellow police officers, it's civilians. You're hopeful just if you could find one.
In what many described as a pilgrimage, scores of visitors came each day to see the site. At the 6-month anniversary of the attacks, 88 high-powered searchlights were switched on to create a ghostly vision of the Twin Towers. The tribute in light remained for 32 nights. Finally, on May 30th, 2002, the recovery and cleanup effort drew to a close with the tolling of a fire bell and the sound of taps. Americans would mark the transformation of the World Trade Center from disaster site to hallowed ground. A single flag-draped stretcher was carried away to honor the victims who were never recovered. It had taken 1.5 million man-hours to clear the site. Some 1.8 million tons of debris carted away in more than 107,000 truckloads. 20,000 body parts found. The remains of more than 1,100 of the 2,823 victims identified. Gradually, thoughts turned toward the future, and an engineering investigation into the tower's failure would pose difficult questions.
Blood isn't just needed in a disaster. Fact is, every 2 seconds, somebody in America needs blood. Please consider becoming a regular donor with the American Red Cross. You can help save more Camille's, Mallory's, Lizzie's, and Becky's. Call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE for an appointment. Who knows how many will be saved by you.
Wow. I have to call Mother. You should see this place, Mom. So luxurious. Doug must have paid $500 a night.
My wife thinks I spent a fortune on this honeymoon, but I got the room for $99 on Hotels.com. Great deal. 2 clicks, and I had a room.
Save on thousands of hotels worldwide. Hotels.com. The best prices at the best places, guaranteed.
I think do-it-yourself is very much an attitude. It's just such an American tradition. If you want to figure out if you can do something with your own 2 hands, whether it's a repair or a rebuild, there's a lot of folks that will do this because they get enjoyment out of it. The sense of satisfaction at the end of having done it at home, done it ourselves, that's something that's wonderful and it's very American. The biggest challenge for any do-it-yourselfer is having the right tools. The Craftsman Tool Department is really the place to go for the value and warranty.
1,800 Craftsman hand tools, all made in America, guaranteed forever. Find what you need in this free catalog.
I always think that good tools are the key to a job well done.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome. This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
Twisted steel, an ID card, a fire truck almost intact. We at the History Channel were honored to have exclusive access to the effort to rescue and preserve objects of significance during the 9/11 recovery. A briefcase, a fragment of a plane, a way of remembering the day that changed us forever. Relics from the rubble, next on the History Channel.
Every day, AmeriDebt helps more people with money problems.
My credit card debt was outrageous. Then I called AmeriDebt. They contacted my creditors and got my payments almost cut in half.
AmeriDebt is a nonprofit organization that offers free consultations to consumers seeking to eliminate their debt.
Every month I pay our credit card bills, but the balances never seem to get smaller.
AmeriDebt got our interest rates reduced, and now the balances are dropping dramatically.
Join the thousands of people who have turned their financial lives around. Call 1-800-354-3400.
Kids, here's my favorite animal. Strong, intelligent, ethical, dependable, compassionate, and patriotic. By the way, where's John?
Intelligent, strong, ethical, dependable, compassionate, and patriotic.
When you help your neighbors, you help your nation. Everyone can do something.
Visit us at usafreedomcorps.gov.
When I was senator, I did a lot
After that, I was able to orbit the Earth in a great big rocket ship.
In the spring of 2002, with the rubble cleared away, Ground Zero might have looked like an ordinary construction site. But its 16 acres held many souls and many secrets. Gene Corley, the engineer who was in charge of the federal inquiry into the destruction of the World Trade Center site, was ready to reveal his findings. He had formed a data collection team comprised of the nation's leading structural engineers and fire protection experts. For 6 months, they worked to understand the sequence of mechanical failures that brought the towers down. Their investigation included a careful inspection of steel columns from the towers that were brought to scrapyards.
One of the things that we were interested in was to determine how hot the fire was in the tower prior to collapse. The way to determine that is to find pieces of steel that were involved in the fire but had not been damaged further by the fire that occurred after the collapse.
But finding the right pieces of steel required detective work. Clues came from the original construction workers who coded each piece of steel that they hoisted into position on the towers, marking its location in the structure. This procedure is not unusual, but it was done with particular diligence at the World Trade Center.
Every piece of steel had the number stamped in showing exactly where it went in the building.
Corley's team placed each piece of steel under the microscope to reveal its grain structure.
Under the microscope, the metallurgist can look at it and tell us a great deal about what's happened to it in the fire.
By studying abnormalities in the steel's grain structure, investigators determined how hot the metal became, and thus learned what parts of the steel columns failed first. Corley's investigators combined this data with a visual analysis of the tower's collapse. They determined that although the aircraft were traveling at different speeds and struck at different levels, the aircraft impacts by themselves did not cause the towers to collapse. Rather, the damage caused by the impact combined with the effects of the fires were both to blame. Investigators also discovered an unanticipated weakness in the building's fireproofing. The tower floors were supported by relatively lightweight steel trusses spanning each level. These trusses were protected with a spray-on fireproofing. But in the extraordinary circumstances of September 11th, that form of fireproofing wasn't good enough. Corley's team believed that the aircraft impact blew away this protection, leaving the steel vulnerable to fire.
When the aircraft hit, In each case, we believe that the fireproofing was knocked off. When hit by something going that fast and with that much energy in it, well, it's hard to get anything to stick to anything else.
One of the crucial things to consider in this event is that the tremendous impact and immediate explosion after impact probably wiped out the fireproofing systems that were in place. So the steel then was left unprotected in that area of the blast.
Subject to intense heat, the floor trusses pulled away from their connections and brought down the buildings, each floor pancaking onto the one below.
The main role of the floor truss is to carry their self-weight plus office equipment and storage, whatever is on top of the floors. They have another function, though. They support the columns from moving laterally. If you remove the support from a column, you end up reducing its strength.
Once the weakened columns gave way, the towers were fatally compromised. Corley's investigation also examined the escape routes available to those trapped in the World Trade Towers. One of the pioneering ideas put into practice by the architect of the World Trade Center, Minoru Yamasaki, was to create a building with an open plan, free of internal columns. To open up floor space, Yamasaki grouped the elevator shafts and emergency stairs, for the most part, in the center.
For one thing, it's easiest for people to move to the center of the building in an emergency, and it gives them the shortest distance.
On most floors, the three staircases were tightly clustered in the center core of the building. In the North Tower, they were struck by the incoming aircraft. The stairs were impassable, blocked by debris, and 1,344 people on the floors above the 91st floor impact zone had no exit.
So far, we have not been able to identify anyone that did get out from above where the plane hit the North Tower.
But in the impact zone of the South Tower, the staircases diverted around elevator machinery. Therefore, on floors 84 down to 78, two of the staircases were not close to the center of the core, but closer to its perimeter. Upon impact, one of them, on the northwest side, survived.
Even though there was some damage, there was smoke in it, and it was not an attractive way to go down, it still was passable.
In the South Tower, as many as 18 people who were on or above the impact zone were able to escape to safety. Engineers questioned how the innovative tube and core design of the towers stood up to fire when compared to the older skeleton frame system. Corley's investigators believed that newer buildings, like the towers, were better because the connections between floors, columns, and walls were stronger than in many older buildings.
As originally developed, the skeleton system itself does not automatically give you more safety because the connections between the beams, the floors, and the vertical members that carry load don't provide a lot of redundancy. Many older buildings would have done much worse than this building did. But really, very few buildings have been designed for anything even approaching what these buildings were hit with.
When reporting his findings to Congress, Corley asked for further study into safer fire stairs. He also recommended developing durable fireproofing materials for skyscrapers. During public discussion of his findings, architects, government officials, and office workers wanted to know if it were possible to make a building terrorist-proof.
It would be akin to building a fortress. And even if you did design a tower for an event like the World Trade Center that is 767 slamming into it, well, what about the next breed of airplane? You have 747 cargo plane, you have the Airbus, enormous planes. Where do you stop?
The skyscraper is a device for expressing how powerful you are. And the question is the United States at this time trying to express how powerful it is, or is it perhaps looking at a more human scale and a more human relationship for the cities?
In July 2002, 6 designs for a Ground Zero memorial and building development were submitted for public review. City officials were prepared for a long journey involving much public input to decide what to build on the World Trade Center site.
What we have to do there is have a very appropriate memorial. We can't forget what's happened here, the many thousands of lives that have been lost.
You know, there's just a lot of people who didn't come home and couldn't be buried. And that's really their burial ground, in essence. But I think you want to put buildings on that site as well. It's almost the American thing to do, to rebuild and move forward without forgetting the past.
Born in 1974, destroyed in 2001. The World Trade Towers lasted only 27 years, a mere tick of eternity's clock. But for the people who built, maintained, and finally laid them to rest, the towers would always be giants.
We enjoyed and loved the building and what we were doing. It was everyone's pride and joy.
The neighborhood grew up around the towers, and in essence, the towers and the rest of the buildings made that part of the city whole.
New York may never again see structures so fearlessly grand. But though the physical buildings are gone, the courage and strength they expressed have now and forever become part of the American consciousness.
A great debate is now underway in New York over what will eventually stand on this site. The first 6 plans for rebuilding were universally criticized, so the agency in charge of Lower Manhattan development reopened the design competition to architectural firms from around the world. They're being asked to produce plans that include several elements favored by architectural critics and the general public alike. A tall structure that would once again shape the New York skyline, a grand promenade to Battery Park, and space for offices, retail stores, and residences. Officials have also said they would give strong consideration to designs that preserve the outlines of where the Twin Towers once stood, as a lasting memorial to the victims of September 11th. For the History Channel, I'm Arthur Kent. Thanks for joining us. Our historic look at the 9/11 year now continues with an interview we first brought you soon after the attack on the Twin Towers. Harry Smith sat down with Professor Angus Gillespie to discuss his reaction to the tragedy. That's coming up next. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the History Channel's special coverage of the 9/11 year. I'm Arthur Kent. We're going to take a final look back at the days following September 11th, a time in which many of us were still grappling with the loss of the Twin Towers. Harry Smith sat down with Professor Angus Cress Gillespie, author of a behind-the-scenes book about the World Trade Center. He asked Gillespie about his reaction to the tragedy.
We are joined now by Dr. Angus Cress Gillespie, a professor of American Studies at Rutgers University and the author of The Twin Towers, The Life of New York City's World Trade Center. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Are you able to comprehend yet what happened to those buildings?
No, I'm shocked. When I drove in to New York and I looked over there, they weren't there. And of course,
I've been reading the news for the last 3 weeks. I should know, but I'm still stunned by the absence. It's like a kid with his teeth knocked out.
Why do you think they were targets?
Well, I argue in my book that the Twin Towers are not just a pair of skyscrapers, but symbols. And it's not too hard to figure out why. Because of their proximity to Wall Street, by inference that they're identified with American capitalism, American finance, and by implication, the entire American way of life.
And isn't it interesting in a way, they're called the World Trade Center, yet they never really were a center of world trade?
It was the intention originally of the Port Authority to make it a center of world trade, and they made a good faith effort initially to recruit importers, exporters, freight forwarders, customs house brokers, steamship companies. But the scheme unraveled because the price of the rentals went up and up and up, and these mom and pop companies were sort of squeezed out and replaced by blue chip companies in the finance industry. All the more reason why they're identified with American finance and capitalism. I think it's no coincidence that the terrorists chose the symbol of American military might, the Pentagon, and the symbol of American financial might, the Twin Towers. They were perfect symbolic targets.
Is it too early to say that the terrorist attack would be a pivotal mark in our, not only our culture, but in our history?
I've been thinking about that, and I think that's a fair statement. I think that people are saying to each other, where were you when you learned that this happened? And I don't remember this since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I mean, this is something that really changes our worldview. We will, all of us, remember where we were when we learned of this.
It's so recent still, and we're in the throes of still trying to understand exactly what it all means. And I'm not sure any of us really have a clear idea of what, especially the long-lasting effects are going to be.
Yeah. Well, we Americans, we like to think of ourselves as the good guys. And we're always shocked when we learn that somebody doesn't like us. And I think that going back to that symbolic component, that American capitalism and American financial life depends on a number of assumptions. The fluidity of capital, the mobility of labor, the kind of secular assumption that everything has its price and can be bought and sold. And I think these ideas that we take for granted are deeply offensive to much of the rest of the world.
So much was anticipated when this building was built. 150-mile-an-hour hurricane force winds, even as Frank DeMartini talked about, the crash of a 707 into the superstructure. Could anyone have possibly foretold or thought for a second that terrorists would use jumbo jets as weapons of mass destruction to attack these buildings?
No, I don't think so. I remember specifically talking to Frank DeMartini about this and other structural engineers, what were the stresses and strains. And indeed, they did build it to withstand the impact of a jetliner. Of course, what they had in mind was an accident. Nobody envisioned kamikaze jetliners. And nobody envisioned the degree of high concept planning that these would be West Coast bound planes with a full load of fuel, which I'm told have the equivalent of 4 tanker trucks worth of fuel. And no building, I think, can be built to withstand that. It's a whole new ballgame.
There's so much sentiment right now about rebuilding the buildings. At this point in time, good idea or bad idea?
Emotionally, I would love to see them rebuilt exactly as they were, tit for tat. Intellectually, I'm skeptical. There's a lot of good reasons not to do it.
Dr. Gillespie, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Good evening.
Just ahead, the History Channel's tribute to the 9/11 year continues with Relics from the Rubble, an exclusive look at what was found in the rubble of the World Trade Center and how it will define September 11th, 2001 for future generations. For the History Channel, I'm Arthur Kent. Thanks for watching.
soldier's bond.
There's no one I'd sooner trust my life with.
A woman's love.
You're all that matters to me now.
A call to war.
Aren't you afraid you won't come back? He's a coward.
He's the best soldier in the regiment.
They can't find Jack.
One man
Just come back to me safely.
will become the hero he was destined to be. Heath Ledger, Wes Bentley, Kate Hudson.
I will find him!
The Four Feathers, rated PG-13, starts Friday, September 20th.
Twisted steel, an ID card, a fire truck almost intact. We at the History Channel were honored to have exclusive access to the effort to rescue and preserve objects of significance during the 9/11 recovery. A briefcase, a fragment of a plane, a way of remembering the day that changed us forever. Relics from the rubble, next on the History Channel.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome.
This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
It was a solemn farewell, a simple, nearly silent cortege. One empty stretcher for bodies never found, and the last steel beam to be removed from Ground Zero.
Detail, present, Holmes!
The beam, emblazoned with the numbers of uniformed dead, symbolized what happened here. For months, it stood over the workers who combed through every inch of Ground Zero, grasping for final contact with the thousands who vanished at the World Trade Center. But they were also unearthing artifacts, which would help give lasting definition to our public memory.
Can a mere object evoke an act of war or the murder of thousands? How does a relic become sacred? I'm Josh Binswanger, and behind me is the wounded skyline of New York City. None of us can ever forget what transpired on September 11th, but how will children who have yet to be born come to understand the events of that day? What item will make the horror resonate with them? Throughout our history, we have found resonance in symbols.
At Pearl Harbor, it's the turret of a sunken battleship. At Gettysburg, the cemetery dedicated by President Abraham Lincoln. On the moon, it is a footprint that represents a giant leap for mankind.
This is the story of the quest to find relics from the rubble of September 11th.
In the face of all the human lives violently cut short that day, somehow the objects that survive take on a strange and poignant significance. These are the things that tell the tales of survival and loss.
Artifacts are
the way we touch the past. It's why we keep photo albums. It's how we hold our memories.
There's the squeegee holder that cut through layers of wall to save the lives of 6 men.
There was 3 sheets of drywall, 1-inch thick.
A briefcase that landed virtually intact.
It fell 103 stories and landed 2 blocks away.
Things that turned up in the rubble paint a sad picture of life interrupted.
Like the lady's car that had, her husband's birthday was on the 11th, and he died. And we opened her car up here in this area, and there was a birthday present wrapped in the trunk.
This is a window blind, an ordinary window blind that has been twisted so grotesquely by the force of the blowing out of the World Trade Center when the North Tower exploded.
What survived and what didn't became an unfolding mystery as the debris was cleared away.
I haven't seen a door, I haven't seen a phone, I haven't seen a computer, I haven't seen a doorknob.
There were rumors about objects that would never turn up.
When construction workers said that he had in his hands a box full of menus and dishes from Windows on the World.
And a sad reminder of an earlier attack and the lives it claimed here. From tiny items like these incinerated eyeglasses to 40-ton fragments of the tower's structural steel, these are the things that can be touched by future generations to help them understand what happened here. On September 11th, as rescue teams and the nation's leaders had to respond to the unimaginable, the nation's historians realized they too had to act.
By that afternoon, I was here in my office, and the husband of a colleague here who lived in Battery Park City arrived coated with dust with a gas mask on and told us the story of being evacuated. He put the gas mask down on the desk. We had our first artifact.
As workers dug in, hoping against hope for victims to save, debris was beginning to be cleared, and historians had to move quickly, realizing that to salvage artifacts, they risked stepping in the way of rescue workers.
I'm trying to save pieces of the building, other people are trying to save lives. Or I hope that, some of these objects will help people to either remember it or to deal with it or to somehow understand it.
Rarely have historians arrived so immediately to an event of such lasting national consequence, or begun collecting items in the face of outright opposition.
There were people who felt that we were grave robbing. There were people who felt we were looting. There were people who felt that it was going to take decades, if not a century, to sort out the true historical consensus on this event.
Some, however, felt the magnitude of the events right away and had no hesitation. Smithsonian curator David Shate.
I had no qualms. I was concerned that we were going to miss the boat. And what I mean by that is miss a precious opportunity to find authenticated objects.
The views of Shate and his colleagues were influenced by another momentous episode in American history, in which his Smithsonian predecessors were accused of exhibiting extreme bad taste.
You have the top hat that Abraham Lincoln wore on the night of his assassination. And at the time that that was introduced, some people found that rather morbid.
The hat was kept in storage for quite some time because it was considered inappropriate given that it involved the assassination of a president. But what's very different about September 11 from that is, in that case, we waited until there was sufficient distance from the time to deal with exhibiting and interpreting that object. In this case, we don't feel we have that leeway.
Removing any doubt about the need for historians to respond, Congress stepped in and gave the Smithsonian a $5 million appropriation and ordered the institution to go out and collect artifacts from the attacks. And so it began, the historians' hunt to find ordinary objects that would spell out all the terrible nuances of that bright September day.
Let's look at this collection that was gathered from someone who worked at an insurance company.
One of the interesting things about September 11th, it was a beautiful day. It was also election day. So many people were voting.
Hillary North of Aon Insurance decided to vote that morning, a decision that may have saved her life.
And what this collection of really Post-it notes with Aon on them represent is her sitting by her telephone for the next 5 days and recreating from memory the people she had worked with, her office, and writing them down to say, well, we can read some names right here, where she would say, Sean Chin, not found. Donna Gordano, not found. Or over here, somebody else is missing. Wanda Hernandez is okay. Wendy White is okay. It's the immediacy of it, which I think is interesting. Of course, we know now who lived and who died. But to be there at the moment, you know, to see somebody's almost scribbling and doodling, I think it's powerful.
One object led historians to the next. Lisa Leffler's name appears on this page. Leffler arrived early that day to her job at Aon Insurance, located on the 103rd floor of the South Tower. When she heard the first plane hit the North Tower and saw the massive fireball, she jumped up and began running.
I had left my briefcase. I grabbed my purse, never thinking that I couldn't go back up later. A couple days later, the phone rang. I pick up the phone and somebody says, "Is this Lisa?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My name is Boyd Harden. I'm a rescue worker. I have your briefcase."
Incredibly, Lisa's briefcase survived its 103-story fall in the building's collapse. Its contents, including her personal papers and Pop-Tarts, intact. Knowing these kinds of objects existed, historians made dozens of trips to Ground Zero and the Fresh Kills landfill. As they sifted items from the dust and debris, it occurred to them they were ill-prepared for what they faced.
Anybody on staff handling materials that had been dropped off from the Ground Zero area began to cough. There was a lot of eye irritation, and we quickly began to seek advice from hazardous materials experts. It's a framed picture of the flag with a sticky note on it.
They also had to learn quickly to cope with something they rarely encounter in the course of their work: raw pain.
We'd never bought Kleenex for staff offices, and we really needed this because these were very moving stories, and we found, you know, as professionals, a lot of tears. We can figure out what.
But their emotional task had just begun.
The objects that stick in my mind down there, one is the buckets and the bucket brigade. The buckets that civilians, firefighters, everybody used to get that rubble out. For such a large operation, it was handled with such a small item as a bucket. And it just, I don't know, I just thought the irony of it was kind of strange, a bucket.
All of a sudden you just heard the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life, and got about 10 steps when I got blown across the lobby, and that's when I lost my tools, my Halligan and my axe. And then just the other day, the Halligan was returned, was found at the landfill, and was returned here on Tuesday.
This is one of the axes that our guys carried in on the 11th. It was found the next day. This case here, two firemen from Half Moon Bay company in San Francisco came, and they helped us out with a few things here, and they actually made this case and got all the pictures of all members here, and had the axe in here for us. You know, something that one of our guys had with him at that time, you know, and it kind of gave hope, but instead it's still here. The axe is still here, and Memories of them will always be here.
The amount of debris from the World Trade Center was staggering. Each of the 110-story Twin Towers stood on the might of 90,000 tons in steel alone. Cameras could never justly convey the enormity of the debris pile that was there. Tom Amoya is in charge of the cleanup for the Port Authority, which owns the site. Amoya showed us around Ground Zero when the process was nearing completion.
Currently, we're at a little over 1.5, close to 1.6 million tons of debris removed. Initially, we had close to 14 cranes out here, ranging from a 1,000-ton crane down to a 35-ton cherry picker, all out here assisting in picking the steel, and at the time, it was 7 stories of debris.
In the midst of this unprecedented cleanup, Tom was part of an effort to save artifacts by which the terrorist attacks would be remembered. Perhaps nothing was more memorable than the cathedral-like skeletal walls of the Twin Towers, which stood above the debris. How difficult a task was it to remove them, and where are they now?
The eastern facade of One World Trade, we took that down, controlled, cut 8 tree sections down where they branch off to tuning forks. We cut them into manageable pieces, approximately 40 to 50-ton sections, and trucked them out to Kennedy Airport where they are now.
The Port Authority's own offices were in the World Trade Center. Devastated by losses, the agency needed outside help to save artifacts from Ground Zero and called upon architect Bart Vorsanger.
It's a little bit as if your house is burning down and you go back and you decide what you want to save. You have a very limited amount of time. What are the things that are most valuable to us?
The Vorsanger team was granted exclusive access to collect items from Ground Zero. Their task, to uncover objects and symbols which will resonate for future generations. What remained of the building's world-renowned sculptures, archaeological artifacts, and private treasures was a mystery. The architects set out to find telling fragments. Some of the objects that struck them profoundly were the mangled columns and beams, which illustrated the violent force of the tower's collapse.
And what was critical, because there was such chaos going on, that we had to precisely locate the objects we wanted and give them a modus operandi to the people down there.
Vorsanger pulled in one of his young associates, Mark Wagner, to help sort through the destruction downtown. They could make an educated guess at what might be in the rubble, but there was only one way to find out for sure.
I remember being nervous in the cab on the way down because I just didn't know what I was going to see or what to expect. When we first stepped onto the site and I could see the wreckage, I almost calmed down a little bit. Like, it almost became, okay, I've got a job to do.
Day after day, Wagner trekked downtown, taking thousands of photographs of objects in the rubble as they were uncovered. From those photos, he would home in on items to save, map their locations in the rubble, and list them in order of importance.
We had to somehow tell people in the middle of this chaos, all this debris, we had to somehow indicate what piece we were really looking at. You can't just say the steel beam on the corner of Church and Liberty until you take a large shot like this. Obviously, a little bit further back, you get a context of it, and then you start looking at it more closely to see if you see anything that needs to be salvaged in that pile.
What's come up in conversation is that one box column from Tower 2 that you have the American flag attached to. Vorsanger would like that as well to go out to the airport for a future memorial.
Bring them home! Bring them home! Bring them home!
Emotions at Ground Zero were at a boiling point. And Wagner felt himself treading on sacred ground.
In the first days, the emotions were really high. Their initial response was always, you know, kind of, this isn't a tourist attraction, you know, well, what are you taking pictures for? A few minutes of my explaining who I was and what I was trying to do, they understood, and it almost became, well, come take a look at this, let me show you something.
But Wagner brought to the job a very personal connection to the men in uniform.
My brother is a New York City police officer.
Wagner knew his brother David was all right and had been assigned to the recovery effort at Ground Zero, but he had not spoken with him since before the 11th.
I hadn't actually spoken to him, and when I got down on site was the first time I had seen him or heard from him, and we just happened to run into each other. He was digging on the pile, and I saw him out there and started calling his name, and him and his partner came over and to see him, and just to know for sure that everything was okay was a huge relief.
Wagner had to chase after thousands of tons of debris that were trucked out of Ground Zero each week. The beams that were tagged to be saved were loaded onto flatbed trucks and shipped back through Manhattan to JFK Airport in Queens.
The thickness of the steel is so heavy that you can only put 2 beams on at a time on each vehicle because it was breaking the trailers. They were so heavy. I find it a little haunting because there's still blood on that steel.
Today we're expecting 4 flatbed trucks and 2 large dumpsters. We'll have a crew of approximately 10 iron workers to assist in offloading. They'll have a large forklift which can take a capacity of approximately 50 tons.
The steel arrived at JFK Airport, where it was wrapped, archived by the Vorsanger team, and stored. Eventually, it will be distributed to museums.
Put it on top of the plastic tarp and wrap it up to try and protect it from the elements, the rain. Not that it already hasn't been through enough, but we don't want it to deteriorate any more than it already has.
This 8-ton steel I-beam is 6 inches thick. It was selected to be preserved for future generations for the near-perfect horseshoe-like bend formed during the collapse.
I found it hard to believe that it actually bent because of the size of it and how there's no cracks in the iron. It bent without almost a single crack in it. It takes thousands of degrees to bend steel like this.
Typically, you'd have buckling and tearing on the tension side, but there's no buckling at all.
And architects, engineers, people who work with steel, welders have just never seen the level of destruction and the level of deformation of this material in our lives.
Bart Vorsanger walked us through the large artifacts his firm has selected for museums.
This is almost like an archaeological process, an emotional archaeological process. What pieces can you save that are truly emblematic about the iconic quality of those buildings?
This tangled mass, pulled from Ground Zero, was selected for the terrible hints of torn lives it contains.
You have communication wire, telephone wire, you have a sole of a shoe, you have a piece of fabric. This is clearly a piece of carpet, or possibly a fabric from a furniture, all fused into this incredible mass. And every person who comes here will see something completely different and think of a different story.
One of the more unusual artifacts to emerge from the rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And almost like a chunk of lava from Kilauea or Iceland, where they're very sharp but breakable shards on the end here.
Most of the objects that survived are from the underground concourses, such as these signs from the Trade Center subway station. But amazingly, there is a relic from the very top of Tower 1, the big broadcast antenna.
It was the piece that collapsed onto everything else. And I think it must have fallen far enough away from the internal fires within the center of the tower that it was not melted into some unrecognizable fused mass.
And there's a haunting reminder of how suddenly disaster struck that morning.
This is something which spoke of the pre-September 11th life of the messengers that would be delivering to World Trade. We don't know if any of these messengers were killed. We have no idea.
One artifact yielded a glimpse at the life of the towers in much happier times, when the perimeter's structural steel was being erected in 1969.
When they bring in the panels, they'd stack them on top of each other and align the bolt holes. Worker could reach his hand in and torque the bolts up. And before they sealed this up with the sheetrock and all the building materials on the interior face, the workers would sometimes put beer cans, and the newspaper that we found, the New York Times paper, we found in a similar spot to this.
This extraordinary item, discovered inside a box beam, offers a glimpse at a single day during the building's historic construction.
Monday, June 23rd, 1969. And this is the day that Earl Warren, this is so interesting, this is the day that Earl Warren, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, resigned, and it was also the day that Judy Garland had died.
An item like this allows us to see into the past and gives us a look at a single day frozen in time. When we return, historians search for just those kind of artifacts in the debris at the Fresh Kills landfill.
As I was making my search, I looked through the rubble and I saw myself standing on top of cars and trucks and buses and so forth. And I thought to myself, this must be the parking lot. But then at the same time, I had said it out loud to someone that was standing by, and I said, that's not the parking lot, that's the street. And at that time, I turned around, I looked behind me, and I realized this is the result of the collapsed building, 105 stories, 110 stories down in the street. So what I was actually standing on top of was the street. And that was very shocking to me, and I still haven't gotten over it yet.
Two best friends.
There's no one I'd sooner trust my life with.
One perfect love.
All that matters to me now.
But when one was called to war, the other became a hero.
I saw them taken alive.
To save his friend.
I will find them!
Paramount Pictures and Miramax Films present Heath Ledger, Wes Bentley, Kate Hudson.
You're responsible to yourself. I'm responsible to my friends.
The Four Feathers, rated PG-13, starts September 20th.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome.
This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
Have you saved a life today?
I took 2 flood victims to a shelter.
I donated a day's pay to help a family that lost everything in a fire.
Have you saved a life today?
I teach a class in infant CPR.
I donated a pint of blood.
Have you saved a life today?
No, but today somebody saved mine.
The American Red Cross. Together, we can save a life. If you lived before our time, who would you be? What if you could choose from 1,000 yesterdays, when the past was today and the new took your breath away? Who would you be? How would you live? Who would you love? Living every generation before us, remembering for generations to come. The History Channel, where the past comes alive.
Showbiz. You gotta love it, because we've got the new Hollywood hits no one else has. Show off. It's hard not to, with daring, innovative, new original series. Showplace. This is it, where you'll see Showtime, Flicks, Sundance Channel, and the Movie Channel. All with Showtime Unlimited. Call 1-888-621-2083 and get 4 premium networks on 10 digital channels, all in one place.
America, America.
Coming face to face with freedom is to journey into the landscape of a nation's vision and pride, and to carry it with you in your heart forever.
With brotherhood.
Feel the spirit of America. Call now for your vacation guide. South Dakota, come face to face with freedom.
By September 12th, the Fresh Kills landfill had been chosen as the site where small debris would be sorted. Fresh Kills, an enormous waste facility on Staten Island, sits across the New York harbor from Ground Zero. New York City Police Deputy Inspector Jim Luongo and FBI agent Richard Marks have been in charge of the operation from the beginning. They've also led the effort to save personal property and artifacts for museums, hoping to keep these memories alive with future generations.
Is there one artifact that stands out for any particular reason for you?
I think the lack of artifacts stands out to me quite a bit. I think the fact that I haven't seen a door, I haven't seen a phone, I haven't seen a computer, I haven't seen a doorknob, I think that stands out. But for the things that we have seen, every now and then we'll come across a stuffed animal that might have been on somebody's desk, pictures that were on people's desks that we're trying to restore.
The other thing would probably be an NYPD radio car, marked unit that we had up here. It was brought up here. When they unloaded off the truck and it hit the ground, the lights came on, the radio came on, and it was so eerie because you know that the guy that bailed out of the car left his keys in the ignition with it running.
It's life interrupted. And just take a snapshot of what it was right before, and you get the remnants of what it was right before.
Every single piece of debris, having already been combed through at Ground Zero, went through 3 more passes under the careful eyes of officers and agents of the FBI and the NYPD.
We always look for 3 things: human remains, personal property, and evidence. The debris is dumped into the hoppers, divided up into 3 categories. Less than 1/4 inch, that's basically dust, there's nothing to it. 1/4 inch to about 2 inches, and over 2 inches. The detectives sit along the conveyor belts, and they'll pick out those 3 categories that we're interested in.
The items found here spell out a sad picture of lives cut short. Everything from watches to wedding rings to weapons, mostly from law enforcement offices located in the complex. There's some $75,000 in cash and coin, and something seemingly disposable that survived in abundance.
Probably the most resilient thing we've seen out here is the plastic ID card. For some reason, it survives over all other things.
After having been here for as long as you've been here, is it hard to see this stuff now taken away, to be cut up for scrap, or to go off to a museum?
We feel very strongly that this stuff should be shared with the public because it did affect the public so greatly.
I'm glad to see it go to the museums. I'm glad to see it being preserved. Watching it go to the scrap hurts a little bit. It's like it's being destroyed after it was destroyed.
New York City detective Joseph Briardi showed us around the site. One of the most stunning symbols of the destruction of September 11th was the cemetery of pulverized fire and police vehicles. The numbers are staggering. 98 fire department vehicles, 144 police department vehicles.
We lost 23 cops, so emergency service lost a good portion of them. I look at this every day. It's heart-wrenching.
While respecting the sanctity of the site, a number of museum teams came to obtain artifacts. The Vorsanger team, representing the Port Authority, had first access to gather items for the official memorial. Then, other museums were allowed in. The day we filmed at Fresh Kills, curators from the New York Historical Society were on site.
Piece tells the whole story. Says so much. The glass exploded into the passenger seat. You can see that this truck has been through a really explosive event.
For firefighters, one of the most significant symbols on a vehicle is the door, because that is where a company's or squad's insignia is located. This vehicle belonged to Rescue 2. Every man on board that day died. One museum had ample space and decided to take an entire fire engine.
When we picked this Engine 6, we quickly found out that 4 men had died and 1 had survived September 11th when they came into the city. So we also have an oral history with it. So this is an important object.
But first, they had to come up with a plan for decontaminating it from asbestos. They took it to a New York State prison, which runs an asbestos abatement facility.
We have negative air machines that circulate air through the system that catch any particulates before they're released outside that encapsulated area. The inmates vacuum, they dust, and they use a small abrasive brush to get off some of the surface dirt.
Curators rarely deal with toxic contamination on their artifacts. They're accustomed to removing dust, but if they remove this dust, the object will not bear the scars of authenticity. That's the problem the New York Historical Society struggled with at this jeans store near Ground Zero. The store kept its window display from September 11th, still thick with dust, a striking reminder of the debris that blanketed Lower Manhattan. But bringing it into a museum creates a host of problems.
If this is going to be hazardous to our existing museum collections, is this hazardous to our museum environment? Is this hazardous to the visitors who come to see?
We've solicited, 7 or 8 different conservators from all sorts of different walks of life, from hazardous materials experts to natural history conservators, people that are actually experts in dust, it turns out, to come and assess the situation and give us some advice.
Another delicate dilemma curators faced was how to persuade survivors to part with personal objects from the World Trade Center, such as Lisa Loeffler's briefcase.
Basically, came down to having 3 choices. I could keep it, and then my kids, my family would benefit from seeing it. I could sell it on eBay, because people always buy all sorts of weird stuff. Or I could donate it somewhere where a lot of people can see it, and it would be more of a remembrance of all my friends than anything else. So I decided to do it.
Another survivor walked away with a seemingly ordinary object that saved his life. Just after the first plane hit Tower 1, window washer Jan Demcher and 5 other men were trapped inside an express elevator. They forced the elevator doors open, only to find a wall.
We started kicking in the first, and 2 men was kicking, and we can break it. I look into my bucket, and I see the screws in my bucket, and I grab it, pull out the rubber, and start digging.
To Demcher and his fellow passengers, that brass squeegee holder became a godsend. They escaped the building just minutes before it collapsed. Had the express elevator been 5 floors higher, they would not have gotten out in time.
It's important for us because it is an escape tool, a tool of survival.
With persistence and good detective work, David Shate also tracked down some of the precious few items from windows on the world.
This is from a woman who was a greeter on the 78th floor of Tower 1. One of the 2 staff members of Windows on the World restaurant survived that day. They lost 73 employees, all because they were above the impact zone of that plane.
Perhaps the most astonishing object Shate found is something there should have been thousands of. This one probably only survived because it was in the basement. It belonged to an ice cream store.
I'd pretty much given up trying to find some sort of intact file cabinet. But while I was at the compound for the Port Authority Police, this ball of metal about the size of a basketball was delivered to them. You can see what remains of the file folders that were inside. These were the day's receipts. These were plans for upcoming birthday parties, flavor mixes for the ice cream.
Because the Smithsonian is a branch of the federal government, Shate was able to collect evidence from the FBI that normally would not be released. These artifacts cut to the very core of the horror that morning. Parts of the planes that crashed into the Twin Towers.
Here, for example, is residue of a hatchway from the fuselage of one of the 2 planes. The flush rivets tell us it's from the outside of the plane. Here, a piece of ripped skin from the same
part of the plane, probably. You can see the thinness of it, the lightweight, all the characteristics of airplane aluminum. Looking out through one of these shattered windows, I feel a little bit of the sudden sense of helplessness that they must have felt in these hurtling bombs.
All I remember was the silence of the scene. It was extremely silent. I thought what I expected to see was nothing like what I actually did see at the time of my arrival at the site. There wasn't much that you could say, you could describe. Everything was dust and metal. There was no typewriters, there was no chairs, there was no nothing. Everything had been crushed. I saw too much, as a matter of fact, things that I'll never forget in my life. If I never see another artifact from the World Trade Center, that would be okay with me also. But it would be unfair for future generations to be cheated out of a piece of history.
I remember seeing our apparatus. Our apparatus was absolutely crushed in the front. And by the time I got there, it was on fire. It was pretty devastating to see that, like, symbolic of the whole company. We did salvage, this is a new truck now. We did salvage signs off the sides of the ladder.
The sign that you're looking at here was on the original rig. I know I speak for the rest of the company. Having it on the aerial ladder is important to us. It's a remembrance of what happened down there, but it's also, I think, a way of keeping the spirit of the 12 guys from Ladder 3 and Battalion 6 alive.
They were buildings New Yorkers looked up to in more ways than one. They were a center of commerce, a place to work, a tourist attraction, and a pedestrian compass. The World Trade Center was also home to some of the world's most invaluable treasures.
The World Trade Center stood as a testament to boldness in human spirit. The architecture was born of soaring ambition and confidence in engineering. The Twin Towers were supposed to be impenetrable. As such, they safeguarded gold and paper currency in the hundreds of millions, precious artifacts, and masterworks of art.
I think when most of us think about the World Trade Center, we think about offices or restaurants. We think of a place of commerce. But there was much more there.
When teams of historians and engineers began searching, they had no idea what survived and what did not. In the chaos, rumors sprung up about discoveries seemingly too good to be true.
We had read some article of a table full of clocks that had all stopped on or about, the time that the planes hit. And these clocks were supposed to be out of fresh kills, and there really wasn't anything like that. It was all just rumors.
One lingering question was what happened to the gold? The Bank of Nova Scotia's vault held $200 million worth of gold and silver bars. It took months to reach it, and Tom Amoya was on site when the vault was finally located.
It was amazing, really. The vault was fully intact, with the exception of the loss of power. When we came through and dropped power to it and the doors opened, security system went back on, the lights were on. It was like standing in a time warp. The hair on the back of your neck would stand up. It was just an eerie feeling.
But there were other items that would never be found. Irreplaceable personal letters and papers from Helen Keller, as well as artifacts from two of New York's most important archaeological digs, the Five Points neighborhood and the African burial ground. Another major loss was the entire body of work from photographer Jacques Lowe, documenting John F. Kennedy's 1960 presidential campaign and years with the Kennedy family.
He had the gift of seeing John F. Kennedy and his family in a very personal way. The family was relaxed with him. So there are actually thousands of images that could give us insight into the family, as well as historical moments when Lowe was there and photographed the president that we've lost now and won't be able to see.
Other historic treasures lost for good were from the Twin Towers' world-class art collection. Saul Wenegrat had the honor of selecting art for the World Trade Center when it was being built. In the aftermath of the disaster, he became an invaluable resource in helping find what was left. In keeping with the grandeur of the towers themselves, Wenegrat enlisted the most prominent artists of the day to create custom works for these ambitious buildings. Juan Miró, Louise Nevelson, and Alexander Calder.
This is what we had prepared for the people working at the site when we wanted them to look for the Calder, and we did this for each of the artworks here.
The Port Authority's archives were decimated in the Twin Tower collapse, leaving Wenegrat with the only surviving map of where the public art was located in the buildings.
So this, in a sense, served as almost like a treasure map.
Exactly. We put together a schematic. As a result of that, we did find some portion of the Calder, which was at 7 World Trade Center.
All the public art was destroyed, with the single exception of the Fritz Koenig sphere, seen here in the middle of what would have been the main plaza.
There was all sorts of debris, and the top had been seared off. I was really devastated by it. I was devastated by everything that I saw.
The sphere weighed 20 tons and was brought to nearby Battery Park, where it was displayed as a memorial. Throughout history, art has served to memorialize the dead. Sculptor Ellen Zimmerman designed the memorial for the victims of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. It was created to ensure there would be a permanent place to mourn those history might not otherwise remember.
The piece was meant to sit exactly over the spot where the bomb had gone off.
The names of the 6 who died in 1993 were etched in red granite around a flowing fountain in the main plaza. The memorial was destroyed on September 11th, and the families of the 1993 victims feared their story too would be lost.
Do you feel like people forgot about 93?
I think they did. Only now I think they're starting to wake up. Now that they've publicized it on television and all, I think now they're coming around and saying, yes, let's see what we do for 93 people. I hope they do something.
This was like a terrible double loss for the families that had lost their loved ones in 93.
But in December, a poignant discovery was made. A piece of red granite engraved with the name John for John DiGiovanni, one of the 6 victims of the 1993 attack. The only fragment of the 1993 memorial had been found. In 2002, on the 9th anniversary of that bombing, victims' families gathered at a memorial service around this now doubly sacred relic. When we come back, we'll look at the nation's response to September 11th.
Please, God, help us.
The things that should be in a museum can't be put in a museum. The souls of those people that were working down there and who died down there. Because I never seen such people come together like that in my whole life. It was just amazing to see all those people working down here. If you could find a way to put that in a museum, that would be the thing to do.
One World Trade Center relic that many Americans are familiar with was featured on the cover of Newsweek magazine. In the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, a New York City firefighter reportedly took the flag from a yacht called the Star of America, which was docked in the Hudson River not far from Ground Zero. The flag still smelled of smoke when it was transferred and raised aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, an aircraft carrier bound for Afghanistan.
I'm Catherine Jacoby, a volunteer with the American Red Cross. Like many, I reacted to the events of September 11th with great pain and sorrow. Since that day, the world has changed a lot, and we've changed with it, coming together with purpose and hope. All of us, your concern and caring has led the way. To every one of you who has helped another person during their time of need, America salutes you. Keep that spirit alive.
We hold the past in our hands, and we carry the flame
for future generations. The History Channel's Emmy Award-winning Save Our History, a series of outstanding and original television programs, and a nationwide initiative dedicated to historic preservation and history education.
America is filled with historic sites, but many of those sites are gravely threatened.
The Arizona is beginning to collapse.
America's sacred symbols, vulnerable to the ravages of time.
But what you don't see is the insidious nature of the weather and what effect it has on the buildings.
Historic homes, ringing with echoes of our heritage.
The White House is so special, and it is the symbol of America.
Letters and memories from the front lines and the home front, allowing us to see the history of war with new eyes.
I've seen my first action, and it's horrible beyond words. Experienced things that I never dreamed of seeing.
Freedom does not come for free, and we need our children to be aware of the sacrifices that were made so that they can live in a democracy that is free.
It will take sustained and heroic effort to save these historic structures, battlefields, neighborhoods, remembrances.
They do not deserve to be remembered. They have earned the right to be remembered.
What's at stake is not only our past, but our future. The History Channel asks you to join us in this most vital and important initiative.
Where is that frontier between history and development going to be? And what is that frontier going to look like?
Call 1-877-87-LEARN to find out what you can do to save our precious heritage from the destruction of time. Save our history with the History Channel.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We shall overcome.
This great nation will endure as it has endured.
We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail.
September 11th, 1 year later. This unparalleled event has been documented as only the History Channel can and is now available for purchase. For information on our September 11th Look Back Home Video Library, visit shophistorychannel.com.
On September 11th, pain and sympathy filled the streets of New York City. Thousands of photocopies appeared with names and faces of the missing. Clusters of candles were placed on corners, in windows, and on doorsteps. And the city's parks were filled with mourners. This collective outpouring of grief may in and of itself become the lasting symbol of the nation's tragedy.
100 years from now, people are going to find almost as much power in it as we do now. The death of each one of those people reverberated through so many thousands of other people and have changed and diminished their lives in ways that they will never completely recover from.
Immediately, New Yorkers flocked to donate blood and volunteer. At Ground Zero, an intense brotherhood developed among those working side by side.
It's heart-wrenching. I've been here every day for months, you know, and the people, I can't imagine not seeing them. Again, you know?
Those who witnessed what happened at Ground Zero left with a permanent memory, greater in value than any artifact that may have been retrieved.
The way people were interacting, the way everyone was helping each other, the guy that offered me a hot meal, all the different things that were going on down there are so much more important than individual objects for me.
This historic chapel, St. Paul's in Lower Manhattan, has borne witness to moments in our nation's history. Its parishioners saved it from the Great Fire of 1776, and President George Washington knelt here in prayer after his inauguration in 1789. Now, it has a new story. When the towers fell, this little chapel stood firm, and just days after the 11th, it opened its doors to become one of the many sanctuaries for rescue workers downtown.
The outpouring of love has far surpassed the hatred of September the 11th.
lawyers from principal law firms in this city were serving coffee and giving aspirin to the police officers, to construction workers. It has been so extraordinary.
As part of their efforts to capture the story of compassion and caretaking here, historians have come calling.
Here are some of the bins of supplies that were donated from all over the world. Bandages and dog biscuits and Band-Aids and so forth. We're talking about people, communities that were lost on September 11th, and we're also talking about communities that were created as a result of September 11th.
Well-wishers left mementos of sympathy and concern, blanketing the fence around St. Paul's. But there is one item the clergy asked curators not to take: a cane, hand-delivered by an elderly woman.
She'd heard that a man working in Ground Zero had hurt his leg. She got on the subway in the South Bronx and came all the way down to southern Manhattan, talked her way through the police lines, which at that time was no small feat, came into St. Paul's Chapel, and gave us her own cane. And then she hobbled off.
This cane, the squeegee, the briefcase, all show us how some lives were touched by grace on September 11th. The broken sculpture, the warped window blind, the twisted steel beams remind us of all that was destroyed. The most powerful artifacts are the ones that symbolize the thousands of lives lost. One day, one of these items may be the single symbol by which future generations remember and come to understand the terrorist attacks. When the memorial is eventually built, it may be one of the most significant in American history, but its location, design, and size have yet to be determined. It was not until 1962, some 21 years after the Day of Infamy, that a permanent memorial was dedicated above the USS Arizona in Pearl Harbor. A World War II memorial in Washington has yet to be completed. In New York, some people feel a need to create a monument immediately, but it may take some time to place the attacks in proper perspective and determine what the lasting symbol should be.
What really makes a great memorial? The more I began to think about it, I realized there's no particular formula. Normandy, which I visited last summer for the first time, is unbelievably moving, just incredibly emotional.
So much of what we are collecting from Ground Zero come to us in the form of fragments or ruins. Ruins tend to evoke feelings of melancholy or wonder. This is what the fragments of the World Trade Center will be evoking for people. The absent whole of lives, of buildings, of communities, transportation, cultural hub that just doesn't exist anymore. This very important cultural landscape is gone.
For America and the world, the attacks of September 11th were so horrific that we felt an urgency to demonstrate our collective grief. We need to show how hurt we are, how strong and resolute we are. And in many ways, we have come together. But it may be a while before we can form a consensus on what a proper memorial should be. A memorial that will be visited by the children of tomorrow. One that may make them stop and say, I wasn't born before September 11th, 2001. I did not see it happen, but I remember.
you afraid you won't come back?
When his best friend is sent off to war.
Time to put his gun down! Don't!
They can't find Jack.
One man will journey across a continent.
Why is it so important to follow my friends? To help them, if I can.
Fight for survival. And risk everything.
You've done enough. It's never enough, Abu. I will find him!
To bring his friend back alive. The Four Feathers, rated PG-13.